Hey, Julian, how are you doing?
Jeremy, how you doing, man?
Good. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, of course, man. Anything for the media,
I appreciate it. So I've read that you started boxing. I think it was at 8 years old. How did you get your way into boxing? What prompted that start?
Actually, I was 7. I started competing when I was 8.
Hmm.
But my mother was going to school for some facial classes to become like an esthetician or something like that. And the timing of those classes was right after I got out of school. So no one was available to watch me besides my dad at the time, and he was going to the gym just to train, just to stay in shape. So I was practically forced to go with him because I had no babysitter. And at that time, there's no iPads, Jeremy. So I'm sitting there in that gym, 90-degree gym, bored out of my mind, twiddling my fingers. So eventually, I was actually a big fan of the WWF at the time. That's what it was called. So I would go in the ring and try to do like the Rey Mysterio moves and all that. And my dad would turn around hitting the bag. And it's like, hey, man, if you're going to get in there, it's to do the real shit, not to do that fake stuff. So I just got up and started hitting the bag. And, the coaches would pump me up. And I don't know if there was, they were just blowing smoke or not, but, they just, they practically just kept motivating me. And after, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks of just hitting the bag, as just something to pass the time, they put me into spar with a kid who was a lot bigger than me and about 2 or 3 years older than me. And I wrecked this kid, man. I was sitting there just playing a game. I considered it like a game of tag. And after like 1 or 2 rounds, the kid was crying and bleeding out his nose. And my trainers and my dad sat me down afterwards, and they were like, "Listen, man, you just did that, and you were just playing around. You got to take this serious." And after 2 years of being, just in the gym, I was already ranked number 1 in the country by 9 years old.
So I mean, it sounds like just naturally you had an affinity for boxing even at a young age.
Yeah, I was always an athletic kid, and I was always physically strong. So I believe that played a part.
Well, you do all these great things in the sport. I mean, 2012, 2013 as an amateur were monster years for you. Obviously, winning those titles showed that you were going to be something special as a pro. What prompted you to jump to the pros? Were there any ambitions of like the Olympics or anything like that?
Yeah, I was actually the Olympic alternate for
Mhm.
2012. But I was ranked number 1 in the country consecutively since I'm 9 years old. So from 9 years old to when I turned pro, I was either number 1 in the country or I lost in the finals of a big tournament or something like that. And as time progressed in the amateurs, I realized the best fighters weren't winning. The
Mhm.
computer system. When I went internationally, when I competed internationally, there were so many biased decisions just based off the fact that America was hated at these
Mhm.
competitions. So we felt personally, in our opinion, that we were even cheated out of the 2012 Olympic team to be as the number 1, the representative to go. I just turned 17 years old. And it was kind of funny because the one who ended up did going was Jamal Herring. And so we're acquaintances now. But, it was just, we didn't feel like it was worth waiting another 4 rounds to to feel cheated again. So and plus I was already sparring pros by the time I was 12 years old, little 108s and world
Mhm.
champions at that. So we just felt like we had a style that was more suitable for the pros anyway.
So you turn pro, you're climbing up the ranks, you're winning your fights, everything's looking good, and then the injuries start to occur. As far as the injuries, was it 2 injuries, 2 shoulder injuries?
No, it was the same injury. Just
Okay.
yeah, it was the same injury, just at 2 separate times. Um, and it was just something, we had time and age on our side, and
Hmm.
I had a great medical team, Performance Health, out of New York and New Jersey, who they work with all the Giants and all the Yankee players and all professional athletes fly in to come see them. So they really took care of me. When the injury happened, I was in my early 20s or early to mid 20s. So I was undefeated fighter, and we just, we knew we had time. So we took our time. We didn't rush back. We did kind of rush back a little bit because it was like my first real injury of the sport.
Mhm.
But we then quickly realized like, oh shit, we can't play around with this. Let's really take our time off and get this right.
What exactly was the nature of the injury, and were you worried that your career was in jeopardy at all?
It was a torn labrum,
Mhm.
and no, not really. There was some points down the road that would force, we really consider it's like it was my first major loss in the sport of boxing. I've been winning and my whole life and bred to be this champion my whole life and had a winning, confident mentality. And this was the only time that I was down and couldn't do shit about it.
Mhm.
So that definitely rewired my mentality and just everything about me. And, my body has been active and has been forced to throughout training to release all this tension and energy throughout this physicality of mine, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting on a couch and not able to move for months on end. So that definitely affected the body and the way the body reacted to the injury.
Mhm.
But there were no doubts, after I think a month and a half of 2 months of being in the sling, I'm like, oh shit, I can throw my jab already. And everyone's like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I was ready to get back in there. That's part of the reason why I was in the ring within 5 months of having the surgery, even though I looked like shit. But that after that fight, I think it was in Omaha, we realized like, all right, we got to take our time with this. So
I know there was a time out of the ring, 2018, I believe it was. There was no fights. During that time away, um, how did you kind of spend your time, and was boxing always on your mind during that period?
yeah, boxing was definitely on my mind. But what came from that, um, and it's pretty ironic that at my most down time, I feel like was a very important time for me because I learned a lot about myself and I developed like mental things in that time. Like I said, it was the only time of my life where I felt like I lost or I felt like I couldn't really do something that I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, whether it was even go for a run at times because the impact would affect the recovery process of the shoulder. So I fell into a little bit of a depression. I started to get anxiety attacks, which I've never, in fact, I was one of those guys that I was like, oh, what do you mean anxiety? Come on, like, just
Mhm.
focus and breathe. And, I was very naive about the subject because it never hit me, but that anxiety doesn't care, or that depression, mental illness doesn't care about who you are, how old you are, what you do for a living, what color you are, anything like that. So it'll come and get you, if you let it. So, but the strongest points of my life up to date was overcoming those aspects of myself. And I feel like once I overcame that, dude, I could kill a horse with my bare hands, man. You know what I mean? Like, so that's just what it felt for me and what it did for my confidence. So I'm very appreciative and grateful for that time, despite having to step back from the sport.
What were some of the things that helped you get through that? I mean, everyone, especially considering what we've all been through in the pandemic and things of that nature, everyone's been kind of feeling down at some point. What were some of the things that helped you kind of get out of that depression or uplift your spirits?
Um, Having a strong support system, my family, my siblings. I'm the oldest of three siblings. I also have two children, so that was that is something that always keeps me grounded. But when uh, I noticed the real switch when I started to train again. I started to just be able to run. And when I was back to, I guess, myself, my body adapted to that and everything clicked back again. And also, it gave me time to fall back in love with the sport. I felt like, you know, I felt like my career wasn't being handled the way it should have been.
Mhm.
Um, especially as a young Jersey kid, and I speak well and I'm articulate with my words, and I felt like I had a great image for my company to push. I felt like it just wasn't my energy and my excitement wasn't being reciprocated,
Mhm.
um, especially with the numbers I was bringing in as an early on professional with no help from anybody, just me, my two legs, and my team. So, and I felt like my management or, my handlers dropped the ball with that. But and I was very frustrated and bitter about that. So I kind of just I felt frustrated, and that's something that a lot of times they do on purpose. A lot of these higher ups know how to devalue a fighter and take the fight out of a fighter.
Mhm.
Um, so we just kept our head strong, and at the end of the day, we know our potential in this sport. I started to watch boxing more often. I started to study old fighters and watch videos in slow motion, even black and white fights, and I started to, which is something I never really did before, because when you're always winning, not that this comes from a cocky perspective, but you know, it just sometimes you lose the grip, and sometimes it's more so like, all right, I'm gonna go to the gym and spar, and then I go home and I play my fucking video game, or I go and do music and I go and play my guitar, and that's what it is. But there's always I learned in that moment that there's always so much more to learn, and there was so much that I didn't know.
Mhm.
And that is something that again that I realized about myself. And that was the time I really took to study the craft and perfect certain things. Keep in mind, when I was injured, my power was decreased in that arm for a while. Now it's a different story, but so I had to focus on other aspects of my game. Whereas before, my power would carry me and my skill set, but then I started to work on my footwork and just using my jab more. And because I was throwing the hook and people were walking through it, so I'm like, whoa, that's not the normal for me. So I basically had to figure out ways to get around that. You know what I mean? So and I used that time for that.
Well, people most definitely weren't walking through it in the last two fights. I think you had combined 7 knockdowns in two fights. Was it the fact that you had that rest and that time to recuperate, combined with the fact that you're kind of hitting your peak, that you're finally getting that time to develop? Was it a combination of those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just developing uh, my mentality more as
Mm-hmm.
as I grew and matured. My family grew. I had a daughter in that time. Just me getting older, getting out of the young guy mentality, things like that. That was very important for me too. So I always look at the bright side, and I'm very, like I said, I'm very grateful for that, for those moments, because it really matured me in many aspects of my life.
Looking up to this next fight against Jose Pedraza, obviously he's a big test. I mean, you've been in with prime guys in the amateurs and some good competition as a pro, but he's a 2 division champion. He's looked good in his last couple of fights. What do you feel that you have that Pedraza doesn't?
Well, he has all the tools. Obviously he's two-time world champion, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as compared to me, in my opinion, none of his tools are sharper than mine. He's not quicker than me. He he's not smarter than me. He doesn't have better footwork than me. He's not more powerful than me. Um, he's not bigger than me. I I just genuinely, he doesn't throw more punches than me. The thing is, I just haven't really been able to showcase all of my talents. I haven't needed to. I haven't, the last few fights, the one guy was undefeated. He would come forward, whatever. He's flat foot. The other guy's been in there with a world champion, and he gives rounds to everybody. He was heavier than me. He fought at welterweight or junior welterweight. Junior super well, out of whatever. So he's been in there. Oh, this guy's gonna give you rounds, and I came out using 30% of myself. You know what I mean? So, and a lot of people haven't seen all of my skills, and I understand that, which is why I'm very open, and I acknowledge all the criticism. Cool, but I just feel like this is a fight that's gonna bring all of my skills out, and it's a showcase fight for me, in my opinion. Granted, could be a different story when we get in there, but time will tell, and I'll be able to showcase more of my talent this coming Saturday.
Final question for me. I did a little research on you and saw that your favorite film is Goodfellas, which also happens to be my favorite film. What is your favorite scene from Goodfellas?
Uh, uh, I see. I really like when the helicopters are chasing him and he's in there and the wife's cooking and they gotta dump the coke and all that shit, because it's almost like a mini movie in the movie. It's like so many things are going on at the same time, and it creates a form of anxiety, and it's almost like they really put you in the scene itself. So I'm big into the arts too. I also do music, and I'm also into film and things like that. So I see things in a different way, but that was one of my favorite scenes, you know.
No doubt. I think that was one of mine too. Julian, thank you so much for taking the time. Best of luck come this Saturday, and it's exciting to see you fight. Best to you and best to your family.
Thank you, Jeremy. Same to you. Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
time.